OpenAI just released their answer to Claude Code, and it requires the $200 per month Pro tier subscription. But here's the thing. Despite being $100 more expensive than Claude Max, many developers are still flocking to it. I'm about to show you whether it's worth every penny or just another overhyped tool. And should you choose to upgrade, how to maximize your value out of it. Let's dive in. The first thing you'll be asked to do once you connect Codex is to connect your GitHub credentials. Once you've set up your credentials, you'll have access to all of the repository, whether your personal or the organizational ones. So you'll be greeted with this text box, and it will ask you to create a new environment for each one of the repository that you want to operate in. So here, I've already connected a whole bunch of my repositories, and I've selected one to directly work on. I want to greet the user by their name on the home page. And once you hit enter, the interesting thing happens. It doesn't open up a new interface. It just starts executing on that task in the background. So you can see inside here in the list below, it shows you the progress it's actually going to make. We'll click through it just to show you what it's actually doing on the back end. And once it goes into this execution, first it will run all of the setup scripts that you defined for your environment. So be it your npm installs or various repo setup that you go through. It will first start exploring the repository for all of the relevant context. The first file it looks for is the AGENTS.md file. So this is very similar to the cursor rules that you're already familiar with. So make sure you add one here directly in your repository. And then it will go through the rest of the repo, like with any coding agents, to try to complete that task based on your definition. And so we'll let that one run in the background for now. But in the meantime, I'll show you one of the tasks it's actually completed. So in a previous run, I've asked it to unify all of the handling for my authentication errors inside this app. And once it completes the execution, it will show you two parts on the output. One, the summary of all of the work it does. And in the UI, you can actually hover over every one of the summary and see which part of the code this actually references. So it gives you a very easy way to understand all of the work is actually done. And then in the second section, there's a testing to outline the work it did to verify the changes is actually correct. So in my case, the first one didn't actually succeed. I don't know why it didn't try to retry, even though it had all of the lint errors. And then later, I asked it to do a second run to fix all of the issues while also providing some inline comments. As part of your review, so on the second iteration, it completed all of the lints and completed the compilation without any errors and then returned the files to me. The really cool thing about this review interface is that they've done it in a way that fully mimics the GitHub's code review interface. So you can even add inline comments for every piece of the change. So you can review this whole code diff as if you are doing a proper code review on the site. So here we can say, oh, I don't want to use this line of code. I don't like this style. Let's just say, for the sake of this, and remove the use effect if possible. And once you add the comment, this will add it into a pending comment list that will get sent out together with your next message inside the chat box. So you can do a whole round of these changes and comments and then send them all at one go. So just like you would do in any code review scenario. And once you execute that, it will go on the background to execute the change and then come back to you when things are completed. And then you can also see on the top right-hand corner, it shows the task it's still working on for the thing that we've just sent it a few minutes ago. So once, actually it just completed execution there, but we won't go back to that task for now. So here, we've already completed this change. You can use push to create a new PR inside your GitHub repository, or if you're working just in your personal repo and you don't have any other teammates that you're relying on, you might want to just apply the change and push it to main. You also have the option to copy the git apply that you can just paste in your command line to apply the change to then just push to your main branch. I'll show you the specific workflow for creating a pull request. So it will also do this in the background. Okay, there we go. It's converted all of the summary and the test it actually did directly into the pull request summary. And obviously, if we look into the files changed, we should expect nothing that we haven't already seen directly in the PR. And now the review is ready. You can add your teammates as a reviewer to check the code, and then squash and merge as you would do with any PR workflow. Or even if you're working in an individual repository just by yourself, if you have good CI workflows to verify changes are working, using GitHub PR is also a great way to double check everything generated is also correct. You can also see if we go back into the list view, it also references all of the PRs that are linked to each one of the changes, so you can track which one the work is actually ongoing. So this is another thing I quite like about the PR workflow is it makes it very easy for you to track progress. Because if we go into a previous execution, you can see the work I've already done, it shows a nice merged here. And then now, once the task is done, is you can click on archive tasks to hide it from the list. And if we go look at the other change we've asked it to do, and obviously it went through all of the change and run lint, it passed correctly, and they added a new component for user greeting. Well, all of that actually looks great. And then so now we can go back into the same PR workflow to push the changes. One great thing about this workflow is that it forces you into a very different mindset compared to AI code editors, because code editors is very much a synchronous process where you work with AI to code, but with Codex, they've specifically designed it so that it spins up a new container environment for every single one of the task executions, which means that you can technically start as many parallel tasks as you want to, provided they're not conflicting with each other. I would also suggest try to work on tasks that are truly independent. Otherwise, you're going to get into all sorts of git merge hells that you will not want to touch. So once you actually deal with all of those parallel executions, you can make everything work on the background. Then your task is then focused just on the planning side, focus on writing good specs and focusing on writing good prompts. I think this is quite closely aligned to Devon's workflow. So given Devon's pricing, original pricing for $500, $200 is actually pretty cheap in comparison, right? Especially right now, they don't give you a rate limit on how much code that you can execute. So if you were going to try it out at any time, now might be an interesting time. Now you see the overall workflow. How can you extract the most value out of it? So first thing that you should always do, make sure you have a reproducible dev environment, because the easier you can set up your own dev environment, the easier you can make it for Codex to actually set up the full dev environment with all of the tools that you have access to locally. Inside the environment setup for each one of your repositories, there's an additional setup script section that you should always change. Let's say we go into the settings and we edit for my current repo. You'll see this code execution section, one that you can choose the image, which doesn't allow you to set custom Docker images just yet, but looks like it's actually coming soon. Set your additional environment variables, set your secrets, and add your setup scripts. Obviously, mine here is a super simple npm project, so I can just run npm install here. And you can also set the specific package versions for the language that you actually depend on. The second thing that you should really do is set up your agents.md file. And this is very much like your cursor rules file or windsurf rules claw.md file. This is the rules that are followed by the Codex agent during all of its executions. So the easiest way I'd say to get started, if you already have those rules files, do a simple link directly into that file so that this thing is uniformly changed across all of your agents. If we just look at one of the task executions, we can actually see how it tries to leverage the agents.md file. If we scroll to the top, you can see that the first thing it does after it deals with the environment setup is it reads into the agents.md file. So inside of my agents.md file, I've given it all of the rough instructions of the tech I use and how I like to use Next.js and a whole bunch of the basic workflows that goes on inside of the repository. This will be the rule it always follows. And as it goes through the execution, it will constantly reference back at this agents.md to make sure it doesn't forget it in its context during the entire execution. So you can also see the traces of the rereading of agents.md file directly inside this execution, which is actually quite cool to see. In terms of general best practices, you should only put the context that really matters. Try not to overflood it with useless information and add things in there when you know that AI constantly makes mistakes. All the instructions you know it follows really badly, it doesn't have the intuition for. Don't try to overfill it with a 4 or 5 A4 pager with all of the context, because that will likely cause more confusion than it does for benefits. If you want a better guide of how to set up these rules files, you should check out my video directly linked in the description below. The next thing to really watch out for, and this is just a general good practice to apply to all coding agents, is for any task that is remotely complex, do a plan first, then execute. And this is actually built into the Codex workflow, because you can see the two different buttons, one ask and the other one to code. So ask will open up the repository inside the container in read-only mode. So that way you can confirm on the plan before you go into the next step. But if you're one of those people that are great at writing specs and also great at writing tests, it might mean that you have a full spec with the details of how to implement every single component and what outcome you'd want. Additionally, you have great tests to let the AI agent iterate on itself so that it doesn't have to constantly ask you for input on how the output is actually working, whether it looks good or not. Then that way, shove in the initial prompt and just go into code straight away. And it's actually a good practice every now and then to try to see if you can write a decent prompt to get the coding agent to one-shot whatever you are trying to implement, because whenever you can do a really complex task with just one shot, it means that your context is great and the coding agent is actually working great there. The next thing to do, once you got the code, make sure to review every single line. And I think OpenAI is really forcing us down that workflow and reminding us how important code review is by building a great UI for doing this diff visualization. You can see that this workflow is properly designed for production environments. It allows you to literally review every single line of the AI's output to make sure things are functioning before you really push this thing into a PR and for later merging. The way to view this thing is that you should think of yourself always as a senior developer reviewing a junior developer's code. And albeit it's a really powerful junior developer, but it can still make mistakes. So make sure you check the output. And really, you should really spend time trying to create tests within a repo, because the better tests you can create, the easier it is for the agent to actually iterate on the result by itself and to make sure things are correct. And then here, if you do have tests and good lints set up, it means that you can easily check, does all the tests pass? If all the tests pass and all the lints pass, you already have a decent confidence that the AI has done mostly the right thing before checking the rest of the code. But obviously, if you're also getting AI to write the test itself, you'll also want to make sure that it created realistic tests that test the real functionalities, rather than creating a whole bunch of mocks that just passes the test without any realistic features being implemented. I've had quite a couple of cases there with, well, all of the different models. So really, the human intervention, the human checks are extremely important. Again, with this workflow, as I've just shown you, once you set up a task and ping it off to execution, it will all run in the background, right? They didn't even bring up the view for you to look at the changes that's happening. And that's really a good thing, because given the way everything executes in a containerized environment, it takes actually more than 1 to 2 minutes for the environment to even spin up before it starts executing any code. So if you just sit there and watch Codex to its work, you'll be wasting a ton of your time. This is not like Cursor or Windsurf, where all of the code is already checked out, everything is set up, so that the only time that you're waiting for is really just the thinking time for the model that you're using. But in Codex, everything happens in the background. So to get the most value out of this thing is, before you start, plan a couple of tasks well, and then you can fire them all off all at the same time, and then let it execute on the backend. If you also have the ChatGPT app installed on your iPhone, you'll also get some really great live activities that shows all of the execution steps for the task is currently executing on the background. And if you ever want to know what each one of the tasks is doing while you're working on something else, you can always glimpse at your phone to see, okay, it's still not completed, don't need to check back yet, and then just wait for the notification for the final completion. There you have it. You can see OpenAI is pushing us down a very different kind of thinking model and workflow model with the design of Codex. And you might ask a question, do I feel the AGI? Well, it does a lot of things great, but I think we're still quite some way from it. And next, I'm about to show you where it falls completely flat and the places where it still needs significant improvements. So first thing first is, I know I talked about this as a benefit, it's also one of the biggest hindering factors. So it's cloud only. And you can see all of this UI, it only executes in the cloud, which means that there's nothing you can run locally. The model isn't even available to you locally. And the other biggest issue is that it runs in a complete airtight container environment. So only during the setup, when you run things like npm install, does it have internet access. Once it goes into execution, internet access is completely cut off. So if you want to do searches to resolve problems or connect to third-party apps, or if you require any kind of internet connectivity to run your apps, that's all completely cut off. That's not possible right now. I can see why OpenAI implemented this in this way for current security considerations, but it makes it really annoying to do anything really useful. Because say you want to ask it to implement a new feature, it can't even install a new chassis component to implement the UI, right? I'm hoping that they open up this restriction or think of a way that they can preserve security while giving users flexibility to be able to do things like searches or package installs during that process to allow us to get more out of this execution environment. The other annoying issue is that once you go into a PR workflow, you've created the changes and you've opened the pull request for someone else to review, and they've come back with a whole bunch of comments. So right now, if you edit this code, there's no way to update the PR directly from here. If you just create a new change, it will give you another button to create another PR, but there's no way to update the existing one. So based on the existing team workflow, I think this is not quite there in terms of fixing. And also, it would be really nice where they can pull the comments directly from the PR and directly implement the changes. That would be a way better workflow. I do hope that they add in this sometime really soon. The next thing is, this thing has absolutely terrible setup experience. So the account setup is great, but there were things that I had to watch community videos to find out, and that didn't even exist anywhere in the docs. For one, it didn't say anything about the setup instructions. I had to look in videos to find the fact that you needed to go into your environments, add the setup script. The other one is, for any new repositories, given that it already knows it needs to use the agents.md file, it would be great that it's able to generate one directly from the project context. Cursor is currently able to do this. Claude Code is able to do this. I mean, you could just prompt Codex to directly do this for you. In here is generate the agents.md file for me, right? And then go through that execution. But it would be great if that actually guided you to do that, rather than you finding out the fact that you were missing the agents.md when it started the execution. A small change there, but a huge quality of life improvements, especially if you're working on a ton of different prototypes. And the other huge issue that I still have with this current workflow is that there's no checkpointing during your chat. So if you go through your execution and you've got some great code out of a previous session, you ask AI to make a change and it did something really bad, or maybe you specify something wrong, there's no way to actually go back to a previous point of history. There's no back to go back to a previous prompt to edit it like the things that you've already got used to inside your ChatGPT interface. It would be nice if they can bring that in sometime soon. There you have it. You can clearly see that with the right workflow, you can easily get your money back for the $200 pro subscription that you're paying, but it really depends on the person. If you're just focused on vibe coding, on prototyping, and especially just working on light projects, you do not need Codex. Stick with the $20 Cursor and Windsurf subscription, and they are more than sufficient, because with Codex, I've not really felt any difference in intelligence. It's more of a difference in workflow and the great agentic workflow it enables actually in the cloud without having to do any local setup. That part is very much enjoyable. But if you are a person that is great at planning ahead or have a team that you can collaborate with, then absolutely pay for it. So for now, I'll be keeping both of my Claude Max subscription and ChatGPT Pro for at least 2 months as I test it out more extensively. I want to see how that actually changes my working habits slightly in the longer term. So if you want to learn how you can better use all of these AI coding agents, go check out this video over here. And until then, happy shipping, and I'll see you in the next one.